In a glass-walled high-rise boardroom overlooking Manhattan, a black CEO extended her hand with perfect courtesy. But the woman sitting across from her, the chairwoman of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, just curled her lip, pulled her hand back and said, "We don't shake hands with people like you." The packed room full of executives went silent. A few weak laughs flickered through the air. Cameras live streaming captured everything, every smirk, every contemptuous glance, every second of silence, stretching out like a rope tightening around dignity. And no one in that room knew that those words that seemed like just a small insult, would make $2.5 billion vanish overnight. Where are you watching this story from in the world? Leave your city or country in the comments. We always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if what's about to happen makes you believe that respect always has value, hit like to join us on this journey of sharing meaningful stories. If this is your first time visiting the channel, don't hesitate to subscribe, because there are many more powerful, profound, and unforgettable stories waiting ahead. Now then, let's continue to see what really happened after those words. The morning on the 58th floor of the Royce Apex Tower wasn't only covered in the pure white light of Manhattan waking up, but also wrapped in a cold, tense atmosphere so thick that anyone stepping into that wide glass conference room felt as if they were standing at the intersection of power, ambition, and invisible calculations that only the upper elite of finance could understand. The giant glass walls opened to a panoramic view of the city, as if the whole world was standing outside, watching this $2.5 billion negotiation unfold. Around the long walnut table, polished to the point where it reflected even the smallest movement, 11 executives sat upright, as though each one understood that today's meeting was not simply an ordinary encounter, but an event capable of reshaping the structure of a rapidly developing industry. At the head of the table, Madeleine Royce, the woman who had led Royce Industrial Holdings through a series of difficult deals and was known for the severity of a merciless judge, carefully adjusted the documents placed before her. That gesture, small as it was, made the entire room fall even more silent, as if the mere fact she was about to say something would be enough to determine the fate of every figure on the financial charts. Opposite her, clear contrasts appeared in the morning light. Selina Ward, the black CEO of Ward Equity Group. A woman with a calm demeanor, rarely seen among young leaders, sat with a straight back, a composed face and eyes as sharp as if they could dissect every psychological move of the people around her. Selina had built her company from a small office with just 3 employees into an investment corporation controlling dozens of strategic funds across North America. Her presence carried the weight of both success and expectation, forcing even the most skeptical in the room to watch her carefully. Today was supposed to be the day to close the biggest partnership of the year, a deal that could redefine the future of clean energy in the United States. But for Madeleine, this was not just a financial transaction. This was a stage where she believed she had to shine, had to show her power, and had to protect her status at all costs, even if it meant creating moments of humiliation disguised under a veneer of professionalism. When Selina stood, walked around the long table, and extended her hand with the precision of someone who had gone through hundreds of high-level corporate negotiations, the atmosphere in the room seemed to pause to observe the gesture. Her voice rang out low and clear. "It's a pleasure to work with you on this deal, Mrs. Royce." At that moment, Madeleine looked up at the extended hand, and a slight smile appeared on her lips, but it wasn't the smile of courtesy. It was a smile made of 1 part minimal politeness and 9 parts ambiguous but unmistakable disdain to anyone perceptive enough to notice. She leaned back, crossed her legs, and in a voice steady but sharp like a well-honed blade, she said, "We don't shake hands with people like you." The sentence slid through the air like an icy spear, piercing the silence in the room. A few executives coughed to try to soften the awkwardness, while another pressed his lips to stifle an ill-timed laugh. In the corner, the live stream camera for shareholders continued quietly recording everything from Madeleine's arrogant smile to the moment Selina's hand lingered suspended in the air. Selina left her hand there one beat longer, not because she was surprised, but because she was giving the whole room a chance to understand that the insult didn't throw her off balance. Then she slowly withdrew it, as if the gesture had only just begun and had never intended to last. Her face showed no emotion, and that made the moment even heavier. "I understand," she said, her voice low and unshaken. Madeline gave a smile that anyone observant would recognize as triumph. "Now then," she said, pulling the slide deck toward her. "Let's begin the meeting. I hope your company can keep up with the standards we set." Soft laughter broke out again. Not laughter of entertainment, but the laughter of people who believed they belonged to the side of power. Selina said nothing. She opened her tablet and began taking notes, her eyes observing every smallest detail in the room, from mocking looks to arrogant nods of approval. The meeting continued for more than an hour, and Madeline, with her inherent sharpness, continuously tried to interrupt Selina, correcting each model calculation, and even calling Ward Equity's projections ambitious fantasies unfit for the realities of the financial world. But throughout that time, Selina didn't react with words or attitude. She merely listened, analyzed, and observed carefully, as if everything happening was a necessary piece of a larger picture only she could see in full. At 2:48 p.m., when the meeting broke for a short recess, Selina stood up and left the room without looking back. In the long hallway lined with deep emerald carpet, she pulled out her phone, dialed a single number, and when someone picked up, she spoke just 4 words. "Activate Clause 9.4. No explanation, no hesitation, no need to repeat." Then she returned to the conference room, her demeanor calm, as if nothing important had occurred moments earlier. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had changed. No one in the room knew that in just a few minutes, their entire empire would begin to shake. And when the first phones began to vibrate, no one in that room understood that the moment they mocked Selina Ward was the moment they signed their own sentence. When the conference room door closed behind Selina Ward, the remaining space inside felt as if the air had been sucked out. In that moment, every ordinary sound, the soft tapping of a pen against the table, the slight shift of high heels, the uneven breathing of the executives became terrifyingly clear, as though the room itself was amplifying all the confusion, panic, and late-dawning recognition beginning to spark in the minds of everyone present. The large screen mounted at the far end of the room, previously showing profit charts and strategic roadmaps, suddenly turned bright red, the bar graphs dropping straight down, as if someone had unplugged the future of the entire company. A line of white text cut across the screen like a blade slicing through the tense atmosphere. Royce Industrial Holdings stock price, 6.2%, 9.8%, 12.5%. The numbers jumped continuously, like chaotic heartbeats before a stroke. No one in the room, not even Madeline Royce, could grasp how things were happening this quickly. In less than 5 minutes, since Selina walked out, the market had reacted with such force, it was as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to expose the fragility of an empire, long thought to be solid. Dalton Pierce, the company's CFO, a man famous for his ability to stay calm during financial crises, now looked as though all his years of experience had evaporated in just a few seconds. His fingers were shaking so badly he could barely tap on his phone screen, as warning emails kept pouring in. Ward Equity confirms withdrawal of its entire $2.5 billion investment. Eastbrook Capital suspends all underwriting agreements. Northcrest Fund cancels refinancing deal. Athena Strategic Investments, reassessing partner risk levels. Dalton sucked in a deep breath, but it brought no stability. He looked at Madeline, his voice broken, as though each word snagged on fear. "Madam Chair, the funds allied with Ward Equity are withdrawing simultaneously. Not just one, all of them. This has never happened before." Madeline didn't answer. Or rather, she couldn't. She stood at the head of the table, both hands pressed against the polished wood, eyes wide open, staring at the numbers on the screen, continuing to plummet like an aircraft spiraling out of control. Her face had turned so pale, it looked like even a slight breeze could blow away the pride that was always stamped there. The room erupted into chaos. One executive slammed his hand down on the table, voice rising in desperation. "We have to stop this right now. Call Ward. Equity. Call. Selena. Explain something." Another shook his head, eyes wild with panic. "Explain what? Did you forget what you just said?" The entire thing was live-streamed. "Shareholders are watching?" A young female director whispered, as if speaking only to herself. "We're witnessing the collapse of the company in the literal sense." An assistant ran into the room, face drained, breathing like she had sprinted up 3 flights of stairs. "Madam Chair, the media is calling non-stop. CNBC, Bloomberg, Financial Times. They all want live statements. And you should probably see this." She handed over her phone. The screen displayed an 8-second video clipped from the live stream of the meeting. Madeline Royce's voice clear and icy. "We don't shake hands with people like you." Then Selena's image pulling her hand back, not frowning, not reacting, just a slight blink, and the words, "I understand." The video ended right there, but it was enough for social media to explode in a way no corporation could ever control. Underneath were hundreds of thousands of comments rising by the second open racism in a live-streamed meeting. Ward Equity did the right thing. She's a black CEO, and her response was more dignified than that entire room. Madeline Royce needs to resign immediately. Madeline stared at the screen as if staring at her own sentence. Her lips trembled, eyes reddening with both fury and fear. This is slander. Dalton cut her off for the first time in his career, daring to speak directly to the chairwoman. "No, ma'am. This is evidence, and it's going global." Meanwhile, Selena had stepped into the elevator, her calm posture making anyone watching think she had just left a successful meeting, not the battlefield where she had just ended an empire. The elevator chimed as the doors closed, reflecting Selena's face as smooth and still as water. She glanced at her phone as a message from the strategy team appeared. Clause 9.4 has been activated. Market reaction matches forecast. Below that message, the price chart of Royce Industrial Holdings dropped like a vivid testament to the power of a decision executed at the right moment. Selena typed her reply. Begin Phase 2. No hesitation. The elevator doors shut completely. Behind her on the 58th floor, the people who had sat so proudly just minutes earlier now looked at each other like passengers trapped on a ship with no rudder. While a harsh truth surfaced. The moment they mocked Selena Ward was the moment they ended their own future. As the elevator carried Selena down to the lower floors of the Royce Apex Tower, the atmosphere on the 58th floor thickened, heavy and suffocating like dense fog before a major storm. The rapid alerts chiming from executives' phones, the frantic breaths mixed with the scraping of chairs, and the hurried footsteps on the light wood floor, all blended into a chaotic soundscape that only companies collapsing in real time ever produce. On the large screen at the end of the room, the stock chart was no longer falling in small beats, but nearly dropping straight down. The long red streaks looked like spreading blood, each number plunging as if the market itself were using a giant hand to push Royce Industrial Holdings into the abyss. 34.7%. 38.1%. 41.9%. Dalton Pierce stood frozen, his hands hanging at his sides, his face pale as someone who had just witnessed a gruesome accident and was powerless to stop it. He knew every single percentage point lost meant hundreds of millions of dollars evaporating, and now every calculation, every projection, every financial support plan over the past 2 years was dissolving into thin air before his eyes. Outside the massive glass wall, Manhattan looked as dazzling and bustling as ever, but from this room, the city seemed distant. As if the towers outside were silently watching, witnessing the quiet collapse of a corporation that once considered itself untouchable. Madeline Royce took one step back, her heel tapping lightly on the floor, as if even she couldn't believe how quickly she had lost control. Her eyes were still glued to the screen, but the sharpness from the morning was gone, replaced by a mix of confusion and fury, the rage of someone accustomed to holding power now being stripped of it in the most humiliating way. "No. Impossible," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "Ward Equity cannot create this level of chaos in just a few minutes. This doesn't make sense." Dalton turned, his voice shaking so violently it almost cracked. "Ma'am, they can. Because they didn't just pull their investment. They signaled their allied funds, and when one major fund withdraws, the others are forced to react to protect their assets. This is a chain reaction that no corporation is large enough to stop." Another director cut in, his voice sliding between panic and the dawning fear that his own career was collapsing along with the stock chart. "We need to report to the SEC immediately. If they launch an investigation before we have internal documentation, this will be even worse. The SEC is already involved." A voice answered from the doorway. Everyone snapped around. It was Harold Bennett, the company's senior legal counsel, a man who only appeared during the gravest crises. He held a stack of documents freshly printed, the paper still warm, the edges slightly curled. His face was so serious, it made the room's atmosphere even heavier. "We've received an official notice," he said slowly. "The SEC is demanding a full report on the events during this morning's meeting, including the live stream clip that is spreading at record speed." Madeline frowned, her tone sharpening. "That live stream proves nothing. Harold cut her off immediately, a rare act in front of top leadership. Madam Chair, I urge you to say nothing further. Not while there is a lawyer present, and not when millions of people are replaying that video." The room fell into a deathly silence. Then another executive spoke, his voice carrying a bitterness he had swallowed for years under Madeline's rule. "The problem isn't the video clip. The problem is what you said, and the way you disrespected our biggest partner." Another lowered his voice, as if finally daring to admit a truth everyone knew, but no one dared say. "We've relied on Ward Equity for too long. And you insulted the one woman we could never afford to insult." Madeline's face flushed as if she had been slapped. "You dare blame me? You think I'm the only one responsible for this? Harrison Cole?" The veteran chief operating officer stood up, placing his hand neatly on the table as though addressing a congressional hearing. He looked at Madeline for a long moment before he spoke, his voice calm but cutting. "No, ma'am. It's not only your fault. But you are the one who triggered this collapse with a single sentence." Madeline opened her mouth to retaliate, but Harrison continued. "That sentence didn't just insult Selena Ward. It exposed a toxic leadership culture that has existed here far too long. A culture that shareholders, the market, and now the SEC are forcing us to pay for." Meanwhile, Selena stepped out through the ground floor lobby, afternoon light reflecting off her shoes and the polished marble floor like a victory runway. She walked calmly out onto the street, merging into the crowd without looking back. No one could have guessed that this woman, with her serene demeanor and a faint breeze-like smile, had just put a decades-old corporation on the brink of total collapse. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a short message from someone she trusted absolutely. "The media is leaning toward us. National response is positive." Selena typed 2 words. "Keep going." Then slipped her phone into her bag and disappeared into the busy flow of pedestrians walking, as if what had just happened on the 58th floor was only a small chapter in a long-term strategy she had prepared long ago. Upstairs, Harrison turned back to the executives, his voice dropping. "We must make a decision before the board convenes an emergency meeting, and I believe everyone here knows exactly what that decision is." All eyes shifted toward Madeline. In that suffocating moment, she realized that the collapse of the corporation wasn't the worst part. The truly devastating thing was that power, the thing she had built her entire life around, was slipping from her hands piece by piece in the starkest way possible. She slowly backed toward her chair like a warrior stripped of armor. And for the first time in her life, Madeline Royce had nothing to say. The emergency board meeting was convened just 1 hour after the live stream incident. A speed so unprecedented that even longtime members of Royce Industrial Holdings were stunned, because in the history of the corporation, They had never gathered with such urgency, except in life-or-death situations. And today, it was exactly one of those moments. The boardroom sat on the 60th floor, higher than where the morning negotiation had taken place, but the atmosphere here was even heavier and more oppressive. The oak-paneled walls, which normally projected authority and stability, now seemed to absorb a thin, invisible coldness. Outside, the Manhattan sky had turned a dull leaden gray, reducing natural light and making the room gloomier, as though the universe itself agreed with the downfall of the Royce Empire. Board members entered one by one, each face different, yet sharing one common trait: tension lurking in their eyes, constant gestures of straightening ties or adjusting collars, as if trying to reclaim some sense of control in a situation where no one actually controlled anything anymore. Dalton Pierce stood in a corner of the room, hands gripping a thick folder containing all internal reports, detailing the damage: more than a 40% drop in market capitalization, strategic investment funds withdrawing simultaneously, and a series of Wall Street analysts issuing ratings so negative that even the most pessimistic among them had never imagined such assessments. Highlighted notes in the report appeared like death sentences: high-risk exposure, liquidity crisis, potential insolvency. Meanwhile, Madeline Royce sat at the head of the table, but that position, which once symbolized her power, now only made the emptiness of her authority more visible. She tried to keep her back straight, but the slight trembling of her shoulders under the expensive blazer revealed that the pressure had passed the limit of endurance. Harrison Cole sat across from her, his gaze calm, but clearly no longer on her side. He placed a leather notebook on the table, opened it, and prepared to take notes as if attending a congressional hearing. When everyone had settled the independent board chair, Mr. Theodore Langford adjusted the microphone and spoke, his voice deep, every word distinct. "We are here today because the future of Royce Industrial Holdings is in serious jeopardy. The current situation is no longer a short-term crisis. This is a systemic failure, and it originates from this morning's meeting. We need to determine leadership accountability." Every syllable of leadership accountability landed like a stone. Madeline clenched her hands but said nothing. The room waited. Dalton stood and pulled up the presentation screen showing data everyone feared to confront. Within 2 hours of the video going viral, our market value has dropped by more than $14 billion. Capital withdrawal is accelerating, and based on our forecast, if we do not take strong governance action immediately, partner banks will demand additional collateral. That could lead to a liquidity failure within 3 days. A wave of anxious whispers washed over the room. Madeline couldn't take it anymore. She cut in, her voice too loud. "This is an overreaction. Selina Ward deliberately trapped me. She..." But this time, not only Harrison, but Theodore Langford also interrupted her. "Mrs. Royce." Theodore said, his voice not loud, but heavy with force. "Even if there was a trap, the person who stepped into it was you. We cannot deny evidence that is spreading worldwide." Madeline leaned forward, eyes blazing. "I have led this corporation for over 15 years. I have survived 3 financial crises. I will not accept that a clipped video decides Royce's future." Theodore met her gaze directly. "No one denies your contributions, but your responsibility cannot be erased. Your statement was not edited, Madeline. It was clear, unmistakable, and severely damaging to our credibility." The room went silent. Dalton continued, "We have also received notice from the SEC. They are requesting all meeting minutes, stock transaction history over the past 48 hours, and internal communications related to Ward Equity. This is a formal investigation." A young director spoke, trying to remain calm, though his fingers tapped nervously on the table. "What does that mean for the company?" Harold Bennett answered. "If the SEC determines discriminatory behavior or non-compliant negotiation conduct leading to market disruption, we could face massive penalties, or worse, a forced governance restructuring." The phrase governance restructuring stabbed Madeline like a knife. It meant she would be removed. Only then did Harrison speak, his voice light but cold as a surgical blade. We must face the truth. Market trust is gone. And that trust is usually tied to the person at the top. Therefore, I propose with all due respect that to save the company, Mrs. Royce should temporarily step down as chairwoman. The whole room held its breath. Madeline shot to her feet, her chair crashing to the floor behind her like a gunshot in a closed room. "You're betraying me." Her voice cracked, stripped of its usual commanding tone. Theodore slowly shook his head. Not betrayal, survival. Those words struck the marble table like a hammer. Another member spoke up this time with no hesitation. "We cannot let one person drag an entire empire to the bottom." Madeline nearly staggered. She looked around the room where every face that once formed her inner circle now stared back like cold marble statues. At last, she whispered, barely a breath, "You will all regret this." But no one answered. Time seemed to freeze. Theodore took the resolution document, placed his pen on it, and signed. One stroke of blue ink. An era ended. Meanwhile, in an office just a few blocks away, Selena Ward looked at her computer screen, where a flood of emails from international investment funds poured in like doors of opportunity, opening one after another. She took a sip of coffee, her eyes thoughtful but strangely calm. Her assistant spoke quietly. "Royce just held an emergency meeting. Word is, Madeline might be suspended." Selena set her cup down, showing no sign of satisfaction. Instead, she only said, "That isn't my goal. My goal is standards, principles, the future." She stood and looked out the window, where the city stretched endlessly. But sometimes, she added softly, the future needs to be cleared before it can be rebuilt. When the decision to suspend Madeline Royce was officially signed by the independent board chair, the event radiated out from the 60th floor of Royce Apex Tower, like a shockwave quickly becoming the centerpiece of every financial news report in the United States. Within hours, major outlets such as CNBC, Bloomberg, and the Financial Times covered the story relentlessly, each headline like a blade cutting deeper into the corporation's wounded reputation. Royce Industrial ousts chairwoman after livestream scandal. 14B. Wiped out in hours. Leadership blamed for crisis. Selena Ward's move exposes flaws in corporate culture at Royce. Social media exploded at an unimaginable pace. The 8-second video had now surpassed 32 million views, shared endlessly by journalists, civil rights attorneys, Black CEOs, and everyday people long accustomed to seeing injustice buried within the corporate world, and now witnessing a rare moment in which the target of discrimination not only stood firm, but struck back with a power no one had predicted. Inside Royce's walls, the once arrogant empire rocked violently, like a ship in the middle of a storm. Dalton Pierce was practically stationed full-time in the strategy room with the finance team, where large screens displayed real-time global updates from London, Singapore, Tokyo, Frankfurt. All reflected the same grim reality: international markets no longer trusted Royce. European stock prices continued to plunge. Asian futures contracts were being dumped. Banks prepared to tighten credit limits to minimize exposure. During an internal briefing, one analyst blurted out, voice nearly breaking, "We're facing global contagion risk. If we don't restructure within the next 24 hours, ladies and gentlemen, we will not have liquidity by the start of next week." The fearful eyes directed at the warning document on the screen no longer resembled fear for the market. It was fear for their own futures, reputations, and everything they had built over the years. Meanwhile, Madeline Royce sat alone in her office, a spacious room designed to project her authority. Yet now it felt like an echo chamber filled with shadows. Light from the window fell across her desk, illuminating cold marble patterns and pages of the latest financial reports, each sheet reading like an indictment against her. Her phone lit up constantly with dozens of messages from the press, investors, and business acquaintances, yet she replied to none. Perhaps because she knew there was nothing left to say. Or perhaps because for the first time in her life she felt directionless. When a knock sounded at the door, Madeline didn't answer, but it opened anyway. It was Harrison Cole. He stood at the door for a moment, as if giving her space to gather herself before stepping in. "Madeline," he said softly, "I know this is difficult, but things are spiraling beyond control." Madeline lifted her head, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but still holding a trace of that familiar fire, the fire of someone who once ruled an empire. Harrison. I led this company through 3 economic recessions. I fought to keep it alive. And now, because of one sentence. Harrison cut in with a bluntness only longtime colleagues could use with each other. Not just a sentence, Madeline. An attitude. And in this era, every attitude is recorded, analyzed, and judged. A long pause lingered. Finally, Madeline asked, her voice low. Selina Ward. What does she want?" Harrison sighed. "Maybe not what you think. I don't see her acting for personal gain. She's acting on principle. And that principle is stronger than anything we're facing." Madeline turned away, looking at the city sinking into late afternoon, the lights of thousands of buildings reflecting like an artificial sea of stars. "Then we've already lost," she whispered. Harrison replied, his voice sad but resolute. "We lost because we refused to change. We lost because we assumed power would never shift. But the world has changed, Madeline, and Ms. Ward is proof of it." At the same time, in the Ward Equity Group office, Selina held a private meeting with representatives from Summit North Holdings, an international investment powerhouse even larger than Royce, a firm every CEO in the industry wanted to partner with, but few ever earned the right to approach. The man meeting with her was Jonathan Hale, Summit North's executive chairman, known for his calm demeanor and far-sighted vision. He was accompanied by 2 aides carrying a thick, carefully bound dossier. Selina rose to shake his hand, a gesture of courtesy she never undervalued, because for her, it wasn't ritual. It was genuine respect. Jonathan sat studying Selina for a long moment before speaking. "Ms. Ward, I've been following the events at Royce since this morning. The way you handled that situation was not only admirable, it was precise. This isn't a matter of personality. It's a matter of ethical standards." Selina smiled faintly, a smile containing the humility of someone uninterested in flattery. "Thank you, but I only did what needed to be done." That meeting could not continue once basic respect was broken. Jonathan nodded slowly. "And because of that, Summit North would like to propose a strategic partnership with Ward Equity, a deal larger than anything Royce ever offered." Selina looked at him, her eyes showing interest but no haste. "What scale are we talking about?" Jonathan slid the dossier toward her. $3 billion, immediate. In exchange, Summit North wants to partner with Ward Equity on expanding into the European market. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Selina opened the file, her eyes gliding over the clauses, but in her mind, every analytical beat was smooth, sharp, as if she had foreseen this opportunity long ago. She looked up, speaking slowly. "Mr. Hale, you understand that this offer will be viewed as a public declaration of support, and that could trigger another chain reaction in the market." Jonathan smiled. "Ms. Ward, that is precisely what we want." Selina leaned back, her eyes calm as a deep lake that had never known ripples. Then, "Let's begin." Outside evening fell over New York like a dark crimson velvet curtain, and in 2 buildings only a few blocks apart, 2 CEOs, one losing her empire, one building a new one. Both understood that this battle had moved beyond numbers. It had become a lesson, a warning, a change that could never be undone. The next morning, as New York City woke under the pale light of a cloudy day, no one was talking about anything except the expanding collapse of Royce Industrial Holdings. The nation's largest newspapers were printed at record speed, all dedicating their front pages to the scandal. SEC opens formal investigation into Royce Industrial. Leadership crisis deepens as market confidence plummets. Selina Ward's strategic strike rewrites corporate power dynamics. At Royce headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What was once regarded as a symbol of power and tradition had now become the center of a crisis spreading faster than any predictive model could capture. Employees walked nervously down hallways, conversations whispered like ghosts, all avoiding the truth hanging over them. The future of the company, and their own futures, was growing increasingly uncertain. In the strategic room, Dalton Pierce and his team had not looked away from their screens since last night. Under the cold blue glow of constantly flashing graphs, he tried to remain coherent, but the dark circles under his eyes and the way he pressed his thumbs into his temples showed he was battling the biggest storm of his career. Stock is down, another 12% in pre-market. One analyst whispered, voice nearly choking. Banks are demanding $1.4 billion in additional collateral. Another added, Fitch is expected to downgrade us to near junk status. Dalton closed his eyes for 1 second, as if trying to find a sliver of calm in that ocean of chaos. But when he opened them, everything was still there: collapse, panic, and mounting fear. Meanwhile, on the 60th floor, Madeline Royce was preparing for a sudden but mandatory meeting with the SEC. She stood before the mirror, looking at the woman staring back, gray streaks no longer hidden beneath dye eyes, once sharp, now rimmed with exhaustion, and a face marked by a sleepless night. She adjusted her blazer like a familiar ritual, but this time the gesture brought no sense of control. It only reminded her of something brutal. Power, the thing she once believed was inherent, enduring, and unassailable, was more fragile than she ever imagined. When she entered the conference room, Madeline faced 3 representatives from the SEC. No pleasantries, no courtesy, only laptops open, thick stacks of documents laid out, and the cold gaze of people accustomed to seeing through every detail. The lead investigator, Lorraine Shaw, spoke in a neutral but authoritative tone. Mrs. Royce, we will begin by asking you to recount the events of yesterday morning's meeting. Please be aware that any misleading or withheld information can result in severe consequences. Madeline drew a deep breath. The meeting proceeded normally until Lorraine cut her off, refusing to let her build a narrative. We are particularly interested in your statement on the live stream. We don't shake hands with people like you. In your view, what did people like you mean in that context? The room went silent, save for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Madeline knew how dangerous this question was. She steadied herself, voice trembling, but still trying to hold on to the pride she once wielded. I meant internal cultural standards. I did not intend racial discrimination or to offend anyone. Lorraine twirled a pen between her fingers, glanced at a colleague, then looked back at Madeline. Are you aware that in the context of a formal negotiation with a black CEO, that statement could reasonably be interpreted as discriminatory? Madeline didn't answer immediately. She knew she was cornered with no escape. Finally, she murmured, I understand that it may be interpreted that way. Lorraine nodded without expression. Combined with market reaction and investor response, your comment caused significant damage. We will continue investigating whether your conduct violated market laws or fair negotiating regulations. Madeline felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Selena Ward began a virtual meeting with 5 international investors from London, Dubai, Zurich, Seoul, and Toronto. Her image on the screen composed face-steady eyes, confident posture, radiated not just professionalism, but a quiet authority that commanded respect from every CEO present. One investor spoke first, voice full of enthusiasm. Ms. Ward, we've been following developments at Royce. The way you handled that situation shows leadership and composure rarely seen in finance. We are looking at reallocating funds from Royce to Ward Equity. Selena responded with her familiar steadiness. I appreciate your confidence. But before we discuss investment, I want to emphasize that leaving the Royce deal was not an attack, but a safeguard. Safeguarding principles, dignity, and the foundation we build upon. Another investor smiled. And precisely because of those things, we want to stand with you. In that moment, Selena clearly sensed the shift in the landscape. This was no longer a reactive event. This was a major transfer of power in the industry, and she was at its center. At the same time, on the ground level of Royce Apex Tower, the press gathered in such numbers that security had to erect temporary barricades. When Madeline stepped out of the elevator, flashes from dozens of cameras burst continuously like lightning, striking the woman who had lost her world in just 48 hours. Reporters shouted, "Mrs. Royce, do you admit to discriminatory conduct? Do you have an apology for CEO Selena Ward? What do you think about the board's decision to remove you? Do you believe your career is over?" Madeline stood still, a faint glimmer in her eyes, the last flicker of someone who once held immense power, but was now forced to face a naked truth. She no longer had the authority to protect herself. And above New York, the sun slowly set behind the skyline, leaving a final band of orange light. Two stories, one in decline, one on the rise, unfolded side by side, forming a tableau as beautiful as it was brutal. An old empire crumbled. A new one began to form. And Selena Ward knew this was only the beginning. The morning of the third day after the livestream incident didn't begin with the usual chorus of New York car horns or the brilliant light reflecting off glass towers, but with a heavy stillness settling over the entire U.S. financial sector. News of the SEC investigation, Madeline Royce's suspension, and the relentless wave of capital withdrawals had officially turned Royce Industrial Holdings into a textbook example of market loss of control in business school case studies. Media analysis had shifted away from asking, "What happened?" to a far more frightening question, "Can Royce even survive the week?" In the basement of the building where legal and financial teams had set up an emergency response center, Dalton Pierce stood before a massive wall-sized display showing real-time cash flow. Red graphs slanted downward like fault lines in a financial earthquake. He stared at the numbers with the empty eyes of a man who had exceeded his capacity to endure. "How much time do we have?" One analyst asked, his voice so soft it nearly disappeared beneath the hum of computers. Dalton answered without turning, "If all the banks demand collateral today, we can last at most 36 hours. The room held its breath. Another finance staffer added, "And that's the best-case scenario, assuming no additional fund withdrawals, which is highly unlikely." Dalton closed his eyes for 1 second, only one, then opened them again with the focus of a man desperately clinging to whatever hope remained. He turned and pointed at the screen. "We need to identify every asset that can be liquidated in 48 hours. Leave nothing untouched. This is no longer about profit. This is about survival." But before he finished speaking, a new alert flashed at the corner of the command desk, an incoming call from a major international bank. And when Dalton answered, he knew another blow was coming. At the same moment, in an entirely different atmosphere, a sleek conference room at Ward Equity Group's sunlight, reflecting on glass walls and gray luxury carpets. Selena Ward faced a different but equally significant challenge. The negotiations with Summit North Holdings continued today, this time with representatives from European funds present. The energy in the room was focused and serious, but unlike Royce, it contained no fear. It contained hope, strategy, and expansion. Jonathan Hale, with a faint smile and calm composure, set a new document in front of Selena. European markets have signaled interest. They want a partner who not only withstands crisis, but shows an ability to lead through crisis. And after the way you handled Royce, they're looking at you as the model of the new leadership generation. Selena felt no pride in the compliment. She flipped through the document, reading each line with intense focus. "Europe has stricter regulations than the US," she said. "If we expand there, we need a new risk control division, an ESG team, and we must ensure ethical standards at the highest level." Jonathan nodded. "And that's exactly why they chose you." Selena set the document down. "So what's their next step?" Jonathan leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, as if about to deliver news that carried real weight. "They want to invite you to Brussels to attend the new Corporate Ethics Forum. They want you as the keynote speaker." Selena lifted her head slightly, not out of arrogance, but because she understood the significance beneath the offer. In Europe, that forum isn't just a platform for speeches. It's where ideas are defined, where invited CEOs become symbols of industry change. An invitation like that is reserved only for those whom the world believes will shape the future on a global scale. She responded slowly. I'll consider it. But first, I want to see the full market reaction to our latest move. An assistant stepped in, handing Selena a tablet with a fresh market report. Ms. Ward, inflows into our allied funds are up 11% in just 18 hours. Everyone in the room widened their eyes. Selena read the data, then set the tablet down, her voice barely above a whisper. The market remembers respect. Meanwhile, at Royce headquarters, Madeline Royce had just left a closed-door meeting with the SEC. If days earlier she walked with the confident pride of someone atop the power pyramid, now each step felt heavy like dragging stones. She walked down the long hallway feeling the silence of employees. No one spoke. No one greeted her. No one dared meet her gaze. But it was precisely this silence, cold and hollow, that felt like a verdict even more devastating than public condemnation. When she opened her office door, a man was waiting, a veteran reporter from the New York Chronicle, someone Madeline had maintained a good relationship with for years. But this time, he wasn't here for a flattering feature. He was here for truth. Madeline, he said directly, do you want to say anything before tonight's special issue goes to press? We interviewed 14 former employees, 3 former directors, and some of your personal records have been leaked. The story isn't just about the live stream anymore. Madeline gripped the edge of her desk. What are you planning to publish? She asked, her voice hoarse. The reporter looked at her with a gaze that held not an ounce of courtesy. Your real portrait. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, but inside she knew. Reputation, the currency more powerful than money in her world, was collapsing completely. At the same time, in the operations room, Dalton received an email he had hoped never to see: an international bank officially withdrawing its senior credit line. His voice cracked as he read the notice aloud to the room. We just lost another $400 million in credit. And Fitch has downgraded our rating to near default. The room froze. One analyst covered her mouth, eyes wide. If that's the case, Royce may file for bankruptcy protection within 3 days. Dalton stared at the screen, and in that moment, he understood that Royce's empire was entering its final phase of decline. Not far away, Selena stepped out onto her office balcony, looking down at the stream of cars below. She knew the world was shifting, and she thought she never wanted to become a symbol, had become the face of a major transformation in corporate culture. She closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them with a gaze sharp as a blade. This is only the opening chapter. On the afternoon of the 4th day since the live stream incident, with the sun mostly hidden behind thick clouds over Manhattan, Royce Industrial Holdings entered the worst phase any long-established corporation can face. The phase financial experts coldly call pre-bankruptcy. Dalton Pierce sat before his computer, pale blue light washing over exhausted, bloodshot eyes. Lines of text appeared from the internal risk analysis system: liquidity exhausted in 24-30 hours. Default risk. Critical. Emergency restructuring required. No financial model could save a company once market confidence had evaporated to the point of absolute zero. And even worse, the banks that once stood behind Royce were now one by one scrambling to cut ties with the corporation as fast as possible. A staff member approached him, voice trembling. Mr. Pierce, Atlantic Bank just canceled its $700 million credit facility. If they demand immediate repayment. Dalton looked up, his gaze sharp as a blade. We can't repay. It's beyond our control now. But before the staffer could respond, another alert lit up on the giant screen in the strategy room. Fitch downgrades Royce Industrial to CCC, severe risk of bankruptcy. A heavy silence settled in the room like a layer of ancient dust. On the 60th floor, Madeline Royce stared at the article she had tried so hard to avoid. It lay on the front page of the New York Chronicle, with a headline as merciless as any verdict: the fall of a chairwoman inside the toxic culture of Royce Industrial. The article didn't just recount the live stream incident. It dug into Madeline's past employees she'd removed without reason, authoritarian decisions, and discriminatory remarks hidden behind boardroom doors for years. Worse, it included interviews with people who once admired her, now admitting they had turned a blind eye to abusive power. Madeline felt as if the article were stripping away her skin. Each sentence stabbed into memory, exposing what she had spent years trying to keep hidden. The office door opened. Harrison Cole entered holding a thicker-than-usual stack of papers. "Madeline," he said quietly, "the SEC just expanded the investigation. They're requesting your personal files, including 3 years of work emails." Madeline looked at him, eyes red but burning with anger. "What do they think they'll find?" Harrison didn't answer immediately. After a moment, he spoke slowly, as if wanting her to grasp the magnitude. "They're looking for a behavioral pattern. Not a single mistake." Her eyes lowered. Every dark corner of her career she had always believed power would shield it, now lay exposed like cracks in what once appeared to be flawless glass. So Madeline whispered, "They're preparing to indict me." Harrison didn't nod, didn't shake his head. But his silence said everything. Across the city, Selena Ward was preparing for her flight to Brussels for the new Corporate Ethics Forum. But before leaving for the airport, she requested a final briefing with her legal and analytical team in the office. When everyone gathered, Selena looked around the elegant room where late afternoon sunlight shone through the glass, casting warm light across their faces, though it didn't soften the seriousness of the meeting. "Tomorrow, I'll speak in front of hundreds of international business leaders," she said. "But before that, I want to understand one thing clearly. Can Royce's collapse create a ripple effect across the industry? And does Ward Equity have the responsibility to propose a new ethical roadmap?" An ESG specialist replied, "Ms. Ward, this isn't just a corporate crisis anymore. It has become a national debate on leadership ethics, especially discrimination in high-level business environments." Another added, "Many companies now see you as the person who will set a new standard, and that could fundamentally shift Ward Equity's position in the market." Selena nodded, though her gaze remained thoughtful. "That also means pressure increases tenfold, and I want to ensure we're ready before anyone assumes this is just a personal victory." Then she stood, ending the meeting with a statement that brought complete silence to the room. No victory comes from proving someone else wrong. Real victory comes when we help the industry become better. While Selena prepared for a new future at Royce, the future might no longer exist. Another emergency meeting unfolded between creditor banks and the corporation's interim management. Bank representatives sat across from Dalton and Harrison, faces stern, as if ready to deliver a sentence. "We need guarantees our assets won't disappear," one bank official said. "If Royce cannot demonstrate a liquidity plan within 12 hours, we will be forced to demand asset freezes." Harrison went still. Dalton felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. An asset freeze meant signing a death warrant. No negotiation, no rescue. Before the meeting adjourned, a bank attorney added one final blow. "One more thing. We reviewed internal emails provided by the SEC. Some content may constitute systemic discriminatory behavior." Every eye turned to Harrison. He understood exactly what that meant. Not only was Royce collapsing, Madeline could face personal prosecution. As darkness fell over Manhattan, skyscrapers lit the night like columns of fire against black sky. But the only place without light was the corner of Madeline's office, where she sat staring at her screen, rereading the SEC email until the words blurred in her vision. Then her personal phone buzzed. One message. "Mrs. Royce, you are requested at the SEC office at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow to continue examination regarding leadership conduct charges." Madeline stared at the message for a very long time, so long that the screen's glow reflected on her face like moonlight on a cracking stone statue. Because she understood perfectly, what awaited tomorrow would no longer be a corporate investigation. It would be a personal one. Elsewhere in the city, Selena zipped her carry-on and headed toward the car. Her assistant handed her the next day's itinerary, including a list of international speakers, scheduled meetings with EU representatives, and proposed topics for her keynote address. Selina skimmed it, then said softly, "Tomorrow isn't just a speech. It's a reminder that respect isn't a supplemental culture. It's foundational." She turned and walked to the door. And as it closed behind her, the city seemed to hold its breath. An old empire was almost gone. A new one was crossing continents. And the world was watching. Morning in Washington, D.C. began under a cool, subdued sky strangely fitting for Madeleine Royce's mood as she sat in the black sedan, rolling slowly toward the SEC headquarters. The imposing federal buildings lining the street appeared like monolithic pillars, their austere presence pressing down on Madeleine's already unsteady heart. She looked down at her hands resting on her lap. Hands that had signed hundreds of billion-dollar deals, hands that had rested on employees' shoulders to remind them who held the power, now trembling in a way she had never experienced in her entire career. When the car stopped in front of the SEC building, Madeleine inhaled deeply. She knew whether she liked it or not. From this moment on, she was no longer walking in as the chairwoman of a corporation. She was walking in as someone under suspicion, potentially under investigation for serious misconduct. The glass doors opened. A long hallway lined with blue carpet led to the conference room where the investigative team was already waiting. On the table were stacks of thick files, each labeled numbered, and arranged with the meticulous order of a full-scale inquiry. Lorraine Shaw looked up as Madeleine entered. "Mrs. Royce, thank you for arriving on time," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, yet sharp enough for Madeleine to feel the chill in every syllable. Madeleine sat down, trying to remain composed, though her spine stayed rigid, as if clinging to the last remnants of authority. Lorraine began. "We have reviewed all documents regarding the meeting with Ward Equity Group internal emails over the past 3 years, and we have sufficient grounds to expand the investigation to determine whether there is a systemic pattern of discriminatory conduct within your corporation." Madeleine's heart tightened, not because she felt guilt, but because she recognized the legal gravity of that phrase. Lorraine continued, this time sliding a file across the table toward Madeleine. "These are emails sent from your account to internal staff, including statements alluding to gender, race, and personnel classification. Would you like to explain anything before we proceed?" Madeleine flipped through the file, her eyes scanning lines of text lines she had written with the confidence of someone who believed power was an impenetrable shield. Remarks she once considered jokes, straight-talk leadership culture, now appeared as irrefutable evidence of fostering an unsafe environment for anyone who didn't fit the standard she had unilaterally defined. She raised her head slowly. "I didn't realize the impact of my words." Madeleine said, her voice so low and drained she barely recognized it as her own. Lorraine tilted her head. "We are not here to evaluate intent, Mrs. Royce. We are here to evaluate consequences." One word, consequences, dropped like a verdict. Meanwhile, over 700 miles away in Brussels, Selina Ward stepped onto the main stage of the new Corporate Ethics Forum to extended applause. The hall, designed with modern European architecture and soft white lighting, was filled with hundreds of corporate leaders from more than 40 countries seated and waiting. Selina approached the podium posture, straight face, calm as still water. She didn't need to look at her notes. Every word she would say had been forged through years of experience, invisible scars, and the events that brought her here. "Ladies and gentlemen," Selina began, her voice steady and resonant, "corporate ethics does not begin with regulations or laws written on paper. Ethics begin with how we respect one another in moments when no one is watching." The room fell completely silent. She continued. "And when disrespect occurs, even in a live broadcast, it shows us the problem is not the incident. The problem is the system." A Japanese executive nodded. An EU representative leaned forward. You could feel the energy rippling across the audience. "We cannot hope for a better future if we are afraid to name existing failures," Selina said. "And we cannot lead if we treat humiliating others as a strategy." The final sentence pierced the veneer of corporate absolute power like an arrow. Immediately after the speech, European media exploded Selina Ward, the voice of a new corporate era. A leader who turns crisis into blueprint for change. Selina's standing didn't just rise. It reached an entirely different level icon of a new standard. Back in New York, while Selina was being greeted by EU officials at Royce Harrison Cole received an urgent email from the primary creditor bank. If Royce does not submit a liquidity plan within 8 hours, we will request asset freezes under Section 182. Harrison looked at Dalton, face growing grim. This is the death signal, Dalton. Dalton placed a hand on the table, eyes closing, as if enduring sharp pain. If assets are frozen, we can't pay salaries. We lose control of cash flow, and we have no ability to negotiate anything. Harrison added. And more importantly, it will signal remaining partners to cut all ties. Royce will go into freefall. Dalton nodded faintly. We have to tell Madeline. But before he could call, an employee rushed in, face pale. Mr. Harrison. Breaking news from the Chronicle. They just released part 2 of their investigation on Madeline, and the contents are much worse. Harrison grabbed the report, and when he scanned the opening lines, his eyes widened. Former employees reveal discriminatory leadership practices under Royce regime. And worse, SEC sources confirm ongoing investigation of individual liability. Harrison knew this wasn't just a media blow. It was the final stroke. At that same moment, inside the SEC room, Madeline's interrogation reached its conclusion. Lorraine Shaw placed a final document on the table. Mrs. Royce, based on the evidence we have collected, the SEC is reviewing the possibility of holding you personally liable for violations of fair negotiation practices, potentially causing market harm. Madeline swallowed hard. You mean, I could be prosecuted personally? Lorraine replied softly, but with steel. In the worst case, yes. No further words were spoken. No defense held any weight. Everything that once defined Madeline Royce, power, reputation, pride, was collapsing layer by layer like a sand tower swallowed by the tide. Meanwhile, in Brussels, as Selina stepped off the stage, her phone vibrated. A message from Jonathan Hale. Royce Industrial, on the brink of bankruptcy. SEC investigating personal conduct. The industry is watching, and they see you as the future. Selina read the words, eyes showing no gloating triumph. She knew her rise wasn't built on someone else's downfall, but on exposing what should have been changed long ago. She put her phone away and walked down the polished hallway of the conference center. And behind her, the door to an old era was closing. A new door, bright, demanding, full of challenges, was opening. On the morning of the 5th day, New York woke up in a chaos it didn't quite know how to understand. Freshly printed newspapers seemed to burn in the hands of readers, headlines cascading with news about the imminent collapse of Royce Industrial Holdings. Every financial building in Manhattan buzzed with speculation about this unprecedented crisis. And in a way, people saw the event not just as the failure of a corporation, but as the end of an era of leadership, an era where power once concealed every flaw. At exactly 8:42 a.m., an official notice appeared on the market wire. Royce Industrial Holdings files for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy protection. Those words, simple and cold, fell like freezing rain on the 58th floor of the Royce Apex Tower. Lines of employees began appearing in the building lobby to receive layoff documents, each wearing a face marked by fear and disorientation. Some held back tears. Others searched for reasons to reassure themselves, but all understood that their future was tied to accounting sheets that were rapidly running dry upstairs. In the strategy room, Dalton Pierce stood before the massive screen one last time. The numbers displayed were no longer warnings or forecasts. They were reality. The company's cash flow had completely dried up. When he placed his hand on the control panel, the glow of the screen across his face made him look for a moment decades older. Harrison Cole walked in. His eyes were tired, but the panic was gone. A quiet acceptance was beginning to settle in. "We've done everything we could," Harrison said, voice heavy as sedimentary stone. Dalton nodded without speaking. Both men knew this morning marked the end of a career they had once been proud of. In her private office, Madeline Royce sat alone. The large room suddenly felt terrifyingly empty. The expensive artworks on the walls no longer offered elegance. They resembled silent witnesses, watching her fall from peak to bottom. She held the bankruptcy notice in her hands. The letters blurred, but their meaning was carved deep. A knock echoed. Harrison entered again, but this time he didn't bring files or warnings. He walked in calmly, eyes shaded with sadness. "Madeline," he said quietly, "the SEC wants to see you again this afternoon. They want to proceed with a personal investigation. This will be more difficult than yesterday." Madeline set the notice down. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Do you think I can survive this?" Her voice carried no pride anymore, only the question of someone facing the consequences of their actions. Harrison didn't respond immediately. He looked out the window where the shadows of buildings stacked like giant coffins. "Madeline," he said slowly, "sometimes the only thing left to save your place in history is accepting responsibility you once avoided." She closed her eyes. Years of exercising power, absolute decisions, words once thought harmless, all replayed like a slow-motion reel, reminding her that no empire built on contempt escapes its price. "Then I will face it," she whispered. In that moment, Madeline Royce was no longer resisting. She was stepping into a final reckoning with her reputation, with responsibility, and with herself. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Brussels prepared for the next major panel discussion at the new Corporate Ethics Forum. After her groundbreaking speech the previous day, Selina Ward was now invited to a private session with the European Council and major corporate representatives. When she walked into the marble roundtable room, every eye turned toward her with respect. Not emotional admiration, but the clear-eyed recognition of people realizing she was becoming a new anchor in an industry desperate for change. The forum chair, Isabelle Fournier, opened the meeting. "Ms. Ward, Europe values your perspective on corporate ethics. We would like to discuss building a new international standard, a mandatory standard, not a voluntary one, centered around transparency and respect in governance." Selina tilted her head slightly, listening. "And furthermore," Isabelle continued, "we would like to invite you to join the Intercontinental Advisory Council on Commercial Ethics." Such an invitation wasn't simply ceremonial. It was acknowledgement that Selina Ward had become the voice of a new era, an era where respect was not a courtesy, but an invisible asset that defined corporate value. Selina responded steadily. "I accept. But let me make one thing clear. I am not here to represent revenge or the downfall of any organization. I am here to represent the future we can build together, a future that cannot repeat past mistakes." The room nodded. It was a declaration impossible to contest. In New York, as afternoon settled in, Madeline entered the SEC building once more. But this time, she no longer resisted, no longer tried to justify. She simply walked in, head held high, prepared to answer questions she once believed she'd never face. It was one of the rare moments the world saw Madeline Royce, a woman who once considered admitting fault a weakness, finally willing to confront consequences directly. That evening, when Selina returned to the hotel, her assistant handed her an email just sent from the U.S. National Finance Council. "We respectfully invite Ms. Ward to join the National Corporate Ethics Reform Committee." This decision received unanimous approval. Selina sat by the window looking out at Brussels' shimmering lights. The city was beautiful in its quiet way, not gaudy, not noisy, the perfect stillness for the moment she realized her path had exceeded every original expectation. She was not merely the woman who walked away from a toxic meeting, not merely the woman who countered in a negotiation, not merely the woman whose decision toppled a corporation. She was the woman who made the world reconsider how it treats one another. A breeze swept lightly across the balcony. Selina closed her eyes. "No power lasts if it lacks respect," she whispered. And in that moment, the story was no longer about Royce Industrial or Ward Equity. It was the story of a new era, and Selina Ward, the woman whose handshake was refused, had become the one to lay its first stone. There are stories you forget the moment you hear them, and there are stories that change the way you see the entire world. Selena Ward never sought revenge. She wasn't chasing the spotlight. She wanted one simple thing: respect. Yet that single moment when her handshake was refused, that calm, steady silence of hers, became the spark for an earthquake that rippled across the entire financial industry. An old empire collapsed. A new era rose, not through forced power, but through principle, through dignity, through the choice to stand firm at the right moment. And when Selena stepped onto that stage in Brussels, the world finally understood one truth. Real power isn't about who sits in the highest chair, but who stays true to themselves when everything around them is wrong. If you believe respect is not a privilege, but the foundation of every partnership, leave a comment below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And before you go, tell us where in the world you're watching from. Every place you appear, we feel the connection. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Stories that expose arrogance and celebrate those who are strong, steady, and unshakable. We'll see you in the next video. And remember, respect is always cheaper than consequences.